Hi class, and welcome to our next video on photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, remember when we talked about cellular respiration, we talked about the reactants of that equation being the products of photosynthesis equation. So we're going to talk about that starting now. So if we look here, remember that our equation now starts with 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O, and we use light energy in order to build up or to make glucose, and we release oxygen. So remember, our products that we had last time are now our reactants, and our reactants we had last time are now our products. So autotrophs and producers. Autotrophs make their own food without using organic molecules derived from any other living things. That means we're not using carbohydrates, we're not using proteins, we're not using any of that, but we are using solely carbon dioxide and water, which is going to create our glucose. So these are also called producers just because what they do is they're producing their own energy, and they're producing energy from the sun that eventually is going to be able to feed all consumers. So producers are at that base of the food chain, and they're using that energy from the sun. Autotrophs that use the energy of the light to produce organic molecules are called photoautotrophs. So we do have autotrophs that do not use the energy from sun, but they use other sources of energy to create glucose and other sugars. So these ones are photoautotrophs. And most plants, algae, and other protists and some prokaryotes are photoautotrophs. If it goes through photosynthesis, it is a photoautotroph. So why are plants able to photosynthesize? Well, they have chloroplasts. Remember, chloroplasts are organelles consisting of photosynthetic pigments, enzymes, and other molecules grouped together in membranes. What that means? That means that we're using this chloroplast. It has the pigment of chlorophyll and other molecules which help it. So leaf structure and chloroplast. Why are leaves green? Well, leaves are green because of our chlorophyll, which is the light-absorbing pigment found in plants to be used in photosynthesis. It is concentrated in the mesophyll of the green tissue in the interior of the leaf. So we find most of these chloroplasts and chlorophyll in our leaves. Why? They have the most surface area, and they're able to capture that sunlight the easiest. So evolutionarily, this makes sense. Stomata are the tiny pores in the leaf on the underside that allows carbon dioxide to enter and oxygen to leave. So those gases are going to exchange through the stomata in the leaf, and we're able to get the carbon dioxide in, the oxygen out. So the veins in the leaf deliver water absorbed by the roots. So the water is still coming from the roots. Now, pause the video and write all of this down because it's very important. So if we look at this middle part here, right through here, is the mesophyll of the leaf. And all of these little different cells have up to 30 to 40 different chloroplasts in them. So they have a lot in order to be able to go through photosynthesis. And if we see right here, we have this small hole, these small holes that are going to allow that exchange of gases. So next, let's talk about the chloroplast structure. It has a double membrane, remember from when we did our cells, and it also has its own DNA. Now, new to what you didn't know before, the stroma is the fluid that fills the chloroplasts, and the thylakoid are interconnected membranous sacs. They're inside an area called the thylakoid space, and grana are the stacks of thylakoid. So let's take a look at this. So if we look at this here, we're going to see this is a double membrane. We have the full membrane here, and each individual of these are our thylakoids. They're like the little pancake stacks that you're going to see inside of the chloroplast. And then we have the stacks of them. The stacks of them are going to be the granum. And finally, all that fluid around everything is the stroma. Now, look at this leaf that is underwater. This leaf is going through photosynthesis. What do you think that bubble is? If you said oxygen, you would be correct. It's producing oxygen through photosynthesis, and the bubbles are going to be photosynthesis. Now let's actually talk about what's going on. It's all about electrons. Again, we learned this with cellular respiration. We're going to learn it all over with photosynthesis. Electrons from the splitting of water eventually go to carbon dioxide. So we're going to split that water that comes in, and they're going to be used to connect the carbons from the carbon dioxide to make sugar. It is uphill. That means the plant is making something. It is what is called an endergonic reaction, an energy requiring reaction. So we're making something, we require some energy to be put in. And what type of energy do you think we're going to use? If you said ATP, you would be correct. So what provides energy boost for the uphill reaction? Well, that energy boost for the uphill reaction is going to come from our ATP. And what is the sugar used for? The sugar can be used for all types of things. It can be stored as starch. Remember, that's a polysaccharide within the plant. It can be used to make the cellulose cell wall, or even just for energy. So, comparing this to cellular respiration, the electrons from sugar go into oxygen, and the process releases ATP. This is what happens with cellular respiration. We get the electrons from the sugar and the glucose that we break down using the oxygen. We release ATP. It's downhill. The cell is breaking something down. We are breaking down that glucose to make that ATP. So in cellular respiration, it's exergonic. We're releasing the reaction. So endergonic, we're building something up. Exergonic, we're breaking something down and we're releasing that energy. Okay, so we have two phases of photosynthesis. They're both really, really important. The first one is the light reactions. It occurs in the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast, where we have the chlorophyll. Now, solar energy is converted to store energy in ATP and NADPH. Now, NADPH is the same thing as NADH, but that P stands for photosynthesis. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that electron carrier and the electrons, and we're actually going to go through somewhat of the same system. These carry energy and electrons and go to the Calvin cycle. So we have two forms and two cycles here. In cellular respiration, we had three. Here we have the light reactions and the Calvin cycle, which can also be called the dark reactions. The water is split to provide the oxygen as well as electrons. So we're splitting that water that comes in from the roots, and that's going to give us what we need. So the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast and takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and incorporates it into the sugar by carbon fixation. So all that carbon we take in, that is how we are stringing it together to get the sugar. The carbon gets rearranged into the sugar. The NADPH provides electrons to make the sugar, so we need that energy. Remember last time we needed that energy to make the ATP synthase go? Now we need that energy to build up this sugar. And ATP provides power for the steps of the cycle. So, the Calvin cycle, often called the dark reactions because it does not rely on light. So, it doesn't actually happen in the dark, but it does not rely on the light, so we call it the dark reactions. Now, photo means light, so that first step, the light reactions, where we're absorbing the light, comes from photo. Synthesis, that second step where we're stringing everything together to make the sugar. So this is where we get the term photosynthesis. Now, I want you to pause again, and I want you to copy this down. This is really, really important. This is a great diagram. So if we look at this, we see the light coming in, the water coming in, part of our reactants. And they're going to come into the light reactions. Now, we're going to learn about photosystem 2 and photosystem 1 in your second video. So don't worry about that right now. Then we have the carbon dioxide coming into the Calvin cycle and sucrose coming out. So at the top you see your reactants, at the bottom you see your products. And we are going to use ATP here. We're going to use the NADPH in order to go through all of this. So what's so special about sunlight? Sunlight contains energy called electromagnetic radiation, or electromagnetic energy or radiation. Visible light is only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The full range of the electromagnetic spectrum goes a lot higher. So if you've had an X-ray before, you've been exposed to a different form of light. Radio waves is another form of light. And then we use other forms like gamma waves. Now light travels in waves. It is truly a wave. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. So the more frequent we see a wave, the higher the energy. So light can also behave as a particle. This is due to the wave-particle duality of light. So when it behaves as a particle, it is called a photon, and you might have heard this term before. A photon is a fixed quantity of the light, and we measure light quantity in this. Pigments of the thylakoid membrane absorb these photons. So it all comes back to photosynthesis. What is not absorbed is reflected. So we're absorbing all of the different colors besides green, and green is what is being reflected. Picture of a chloroplast absorbing all that light. Okay, so there are 3 pigments that absorb different wavelengths. We have chlorophyll A, which is our main pigment, chlorophyll B, which broadens the range of absorption and funnels absorbed energy into chlorophyll A, and carotenoids absorb excessive light energy. So when pigments receive photons, they transfer it to the electrons. The electrons jump to a higher energy level, which is what we call the excited state, where electrons are unstable. The electrons drop back down to their ground state. As they do, they release their excess energy, and thus we're able to make our glucose. So if we look at this here, this is the light energy coming in the chlorophyll molecule, and some of the energy is actually going to be released as heat, and other energy is going to be released as fluorescence. So when you see a really bright color, that's due to that other energy. The energy released could be lost as heat or light, but rather is conserved as it passes from one molecule to another. All the components to accomplish this are organized in the thylakoid membranes in the clusters called photosystems. So photosystems are part of our light reactions, and photosystems are going to be where the electrons get excited, and they're going to pass off that energy. Okay, this is our presentation for now. Make sure you took great notes, drew great pictures, and we'll talk about it in class.